Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar. Today's a day where I think you can proudly go into the comment section and say fuck Canada, boys, because things are getting pretty bad, especially when it comes to my privacy, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I don't know about you guys, for me, it doesn't really matter where I live, but I am a proud Canadian person. I genuinely have spent my entire life here ever since I was a little baby. I was a man that grew up in the Great White North, and to be honest with you, it's just everywhere is a shit show. Now, I've been talking a lot about American, encryption stuff, age verification shit. I wasn't really talking about a lot of shit that was happening back in Canada land. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got something known as Bill C-22. Now, what is Bill C-22, ladies and gentlemen? Bill C-22 is the Canadian... what is that? What is that bullshit, guys? The Lawful Access Bill. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what is one of the things that I've been teaching you about on this channel for years now? Taking care of your internet safety, your security, being safe against viruses, encrypting your dog shit on your computer, protecting yourself against the scary threats that are out there. Now, it seems like what the Canadian government wants to do is basically find a way to get some of these big tech companies to basically just open that little encryption for you a little bit. Basically let yourself be goat-seed by the police. Now, of course, ultimately, there's only one rule when it comes to encryption and protecting yourself. You either give people full control over an encryption or you just give them nothing at all. There's no half measures here, Walter. There's no half measures in this situation, okay? You either have it or you don't. To give you a great example before we go further into it, a security guy was saying that Microsoft secretly has a backdoor into BitLocker. BitLocker, which is basically Microsoft's drive encryption, which keeps your laptop safe from prying eyes if it ever gets stolen, right? The data that you might have on it. Well, this individual was thinking, wait a minute, there has to be something behind it. There were some claims that were made, and obviously, this guy proved it by releasing an exploit known as Yellow Key. Yellow Key, which allows you to basically bypass, and again, these are the instructions that are provided, copy all of these files to a USB stick, put it into the computer that you have right in front of you. You can plug that stick in with the protections turned on, reboot to the recovery agent, and then you can basically enter commands that will allow you to access a system that you don't necessarily have permissions for. So basically, if you're a criminal in this case, forget the fucking government. Well, congratulations, you just goat-seed into somebody's computer, even with all those spooky protections everywhere. Now, again, I don't know if Microsoft left this backdoor in for like the FBI or something. That would be an insane claim to make, but it's hard not to look at this in that light. So anyways, let's talk about what's going on with Canada's Bill C-22, okay? What the fuck is going on the Canadian side that we're turning into like a fascist regime overnight? So basically, the bill here amends the criminal code to facilitate access to basic information that will assist in the investigation of federal offenses through confirmation of service demands given to telecommunication service providers or judicial production orders for the production of subscriber information. So again, this is mostly for, again, the government to access information through, again, I would assume to be court order in this case, right? Expedite the response to production orders by shortening the review process and clarify the ability of peace officers and public officers to receive and act on certain information that is voluntarily provided to them and to obtain and act on information that is publicly available. Specify certain circumstances in which peace officers may obtain evidence, including subscriber information, in exigent circumstances. Now again, like many laws, it's very long and filled with vague fucking language, which is rightfully called out by a lot of privacy groups, right? For instance, Bill C-22 erodes the privacy of millions by providing a mechanism for the Minister of Public Safety to demand companies creating a backdoor to their services to provide the cops access to data, as long as these mandates don't introduce a systemic vulnerability. These widespread surveillance backdoors would likely facilitate even more data breaches than we see already. Like I showed you with the BitLocker shit, and again, of the millions of hacks that we've covered, okay? Having a fucking backdoor into your personal life simply for the government to keep you safe usually ends up with a fucking giant security nightmare for criminals to take advantage of, right? So again, ultimately right over here, the definitions of systemic vulnerabilities and encryption are not clear enough in C22, leaving wiggle room for the government to demand the companies circumvent encryption. And the overbroad definitions in the bill can include apps as well as operating systems. Canadian officials have made it clear that they believe it's possible to add surveillance without introducing systemic vulnerabilities, which is not true. Like I said, okay? I'm not somebody that works for the fucking government, but I do know how computer protections work. I do understand how encryption works, down to its mathematical sense. The reality of it is you can either have none of it or you can have all of it, okay? That's just how it works. It's like you either have no protections or you give people enough protections that ultimately no criminal and also by extension no cop should be able to bypass it. It's one of the reasons why I use a Graphene OS phone, not because I'm quirky or I want to be against the grain. It's simply because I actually do have a lot of worthwhile assets that I want to protect. Assets like my YouTube channel. It's one of the reasons why I'm not, knock on wood, of course, but obviously it's one of the reasons why I've never really been hacked on my YouTube channel, because I tend to keep everything so air-gapped, isolated, and behind really secure devices, really secure systems, that I don't worry about it. For instance, even on my main computer, that computer back there, I'm not actually signed into my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel's access is so limited that I only have access to it on a specific device that I just go to with a flash drive to upload a YouTube video, title, description, put in a thumbnail if I need to, and publish the video. It's the same thing when I access my tax information, my banking information, anything really important in my life that I don't want a hacker to get access to, I usually access through encrypted devices. And again, it's mostly because it's how I stay safe online. It gives me that peace of mind. Instead of laying in bed worrying, oh my God, this data breach happened, oh, I could be fucked in the ass, I'm really never stressing out. It's just one of those things that's probably added years to my life. Now, this is a situation where, again, I don't trust the Canadian government. I don't trust the law enforcement agencies. I do, unfortunately, have to take the side of companies like Facebook, Meta, for instance, who pretty much also have come out and said that these bills talk about systemic vulnerabilities. However, the definition is unclear. Essential terms like encryption are left to be defined in regulation. So again, because none of these are actually defined right now, there's a good chance that down the road, maybe, just maybe, we could say, hey, listen, put in a little backdoor just for the cops, okay? Don't you want to stop criminals? Don't you want to stop fucking terrorists? Don't you want to stop pedophiles? And see, the reality of it is that, yes, I want all terrorism and criminals and pedos to be stopped. But when we live in an Epstein society where guys like Jeffrey Epstein were using fucking Gmail to do some of the sickest communication that you could ever see, it makes me wonder, listen, there's going to be two types of criminals. There's going to be criminals that just do not give a fuck, people like the Davids of the world, people like the Taliban, for instance, who, believe it or not, this might be a mind-blowing thing, but back in 2005, the Taliban were doing things like foldering, which basically was where the Taliban, like the section that existed, was using one Gmail account, and they were just typing in like emails, and instead of sending them, they would save it to drafts, because remember, they weren't sending email, so what kind of network? But people would just sign into the same email account, look at the drafts, and verify things that way. Now, obviously, it's kind of stupid. You can keep emails hidden, for instance, but ultimately, at the end of the day, once you get a warrant, once you have Google looking into that specific account, things tend to fall apart. Nowadays, there's a lot of criminal actions that happen over obviously encrypted platforms like Telegram, like Signal, even WhatsApp, for instance, where once you add things like end-to-end encryption, where one device blocks out one device encrypts data, and it can only be encrypted by the device that the data is sent to, that kind of encryption where nobody can peek in, obviously comes with its negatives and positives. The positives are that you and me can talk to each other without the big government or criminals looking into our private conversations. Me and my wife can have conversations that I wouldn't want leaked out into the world. We could send photos that we wouldn't want leaked out into the world. But now with the back door, probably not smart to be talking, or having pillow talk or anything of that nature over the internet, right? Because once something has the potentiality to be exposed, fuck me, you know what I mean? Like, fuck all of that shit. This is a bad law. And here's the thing, honestly, if the government really wanted to take care of criminals, there are much better ways for law enforcement to handle this. Let's be completely real, this is not for targeting the criminals. This is mostly another push for mass surveillance on the average person. Because how much will this law get abused? I am not entirely sure, but I can't imagine it would be perfectly treated every step of the way. You know what I mean? You know, and it's fucked up when, like, you can't have full transparency from the government, right? Like, it's not like they have their cameras and everything open. It's not like we have the ability to open up every single government email and see what the fuck these people are talking about behind closed doors. No, they're allowed to look into your life. You're just not allowed to look into theirs, which I find very hypocritical, very disrespectful, and it's not something that I can sit there and fucking tolerate in any capacity. Now, even the actual services that I use, and this is where it actually personally affects me, NordVPN, and I know that I don't really push any like sponsorships for them or anything, but alongside Mulvad, I tend to use NordVPN when it comes to mostly watching Netflix over the internet, and like, or watching any service where I need to bypass geo restrictions and whatnot, or just browsing the internet in general. I like to have, you know, levels of encryption and security. And even companies like NordVPN, who literally are like, listen, we might have to consider like leaving Canadian jurisdiction because this would fuck us over. This would fuck not just Canadians, but all these tech companies over too. The actual text messaging service that I use, Signal, for instance, said that it would leave Canada. Because yes, Signal is one of those services where the only thing that they tend to store is like really meaningless metadata that you can't get anything out of, requiring these individuals to break the very fundamental thing that they are selling to the audience, that they are pushing to people, is fucking insanity, okay? And again, this is not just a Canadian problem, okay? This is a problem that's going to be pushed all over the European Union, and don't doubt for a second that Americans won't push some aspect of this into their country because they have to fight the evil, spooky terrorism and criminals and pedos in some way. There's ways to fight these people without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You know what I mean? Like, we should not, as a society, give up our basic protections so Big Brother can come in and goatsy us anytime they fucking want, you know? It's getting real spooky to the point where where we have to use, like, the dark web or things like I2P, which is way more better for privacy than just using Tor. Like, for instance, in Canada, right, what's really funny for a lot of people is that when you try to access our premier news service, which is like CTV, because of another bill which forced a lot of these companies to pay up to Canadian, like, journalism, and it's not necessarily one-to-one the same story, you can see that obviously for Canadians, we can't even access our own Canadian journalist website on their own page through Facebook. However, if you go to the Tor browser, you can access all of this stuff. Not that they're posting anything, because why the fuck would a Canadian company post on a service that Canadians can't even see? Just pointless shit. But it's getting to a point where, again, a lot of these guys want to put a backdoor into everything, right? So, and this is one of the reasons why I've told you guys, hey, listen, when you're doing searches on the internet, right? Use your own Seer XNG search engine, which I have running on my own local computer right here. As you can see, port 8888. I can just look for anything that I want, like, for instance, CTV News. I get actual proper fucking responses, actual proper searches without all of the bullshit, AI slop thrown my way or the various amount of ads that exist. But it's not just that. It's getting to a point where, again, you're going to have to learn to start hosting your own AI searches. Like, this is what I have to do at this point. Like, for instance, instead of relying on exterior AI services, which I don't want to use for various ethical reasons, running them on my own local system with my own user interface is something that I tend to do myself. Of course, obviously, even utilizing the internet in a lot of ways, we're going to have to start using shit like Tor browser in order to bypass the bullshit the government's doing. Like, it's going to get to a point where, for iPhone users, like, especially when it comes to this lawful access bill, if companies like Signal leave Canada, for Canadians, downloading or updating their app is going to be useless because they can't operate in the country. So unless you have like an Android device where you can download the APK, because I'm sure Signal's just going to distribute the APK to you, you can download it, install it, and use it. But it's just killing an industry here that Canadian governments don't really have a reason to do it. This government, and again, I don't want to get like fucking really political about it, but the reality of it is they've spent so much money, they've pulled up so much dog shit policy, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it's harmful to the domestic Canadians that have grown up and lived here that it's worth kind of talking about, right? Like, these kind of laws only allow a government to get more tyrannical and get away with dumb shit. Canada is one of those countries where I love it to death, but to give you what I believe personally to be something really stupid is, if somebody breaks into my house right now, somebody with a gun, for instance, it's against the law for me to grab my own firearm, legally acquired, by the way, and then obviously load that with ammunition and open fire on somebody that has now put me and my family in threat, right? Like violent, lethal threat. Now, people could be like, well, just let them rob your shit and get away with it. Well, the reality is I value my stuff more than that piece of shit's life because, by them breaking into my house, they already proved to themselves they don't value their life. You know what I mean? So obviously I think self-defense is right. The Canadian government doesn't necessarily believe it. So unless you have the time, years of your life, a vast amount of money, you're going to be fucking punished for protecting yourself. So it's a country that I think is beautiful. It has a lot to offer. And, I'm always going to be patriotic to an extent. But you have to be willing to call it the stupidity. Otherwise, this shit's going to grow to a point that, what are we doing? What are we actually doing at this point? And what's wild is what's happening in Canada is something that could even happen in the second home of mine, which is Southern California. Like, it could be just as bad there a year down the road. It's just wild to me that in the last few years, the government's been pushing so many insane bills, a lot of these super draconian bills, by the way, that it is overwhelming. But for this if this passes in Canada in the state that it is, it actually really puts you, Canadians, if you're watching this, under actual danger online. Because by weakening the actual services that you have grown to use is never a good thing, okay? And again, I get the idea criminals are bad. Trust me, we all want terrorists, criminals, pedos, all these people to be stopped. But we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater because let's call it what it really is. If these governments really wanted to stop criminals, they would do the tried and true way of making a honeypot. One of the coolest things I remember the FBI doing, this is kind of a few years ago, was back during the dark web era, they were selling phones. I think they were like Axom phones. And they were just little bullshit Android phones. They were selling a service. They were selling a service much like Signal, encrypted everything away from the feds. Well, the feds were running it. They ran the operation. All these criminals used the operation to talk about their criminal plans, and the feds ended up busting them, right? Running a honeypot is probably way better, way more effective than just throwing the baby out with the bathwater and putting everyone in danger. And it makes me wonder, right? Like, the whole reason is probably putting you in danger, not because the government wants to, it's because the government can get access to your information and whatever subpoena they want, which I think is creepy. I don't think is something you should be going for. But yeah, I always say, look, vote against this, and I'm going to be voting against it. But I think the black pill is kind of like what happens when the other party that you vote for, that you probably don't agree with on a lot of things, what if they just screw you over too? It's just, what's wild to me is no matter who you vote for, everyone just gets in bed together when it comes to pushing the big brother laws onto the average person, right? But at least here, the only way to really fight back beyond voting smart is to start learning about privacy, learning about encryption, learning about end-to-end encryption especially. Because even if the government outlaws this stuff, right, you may have to get off of the mainstream services and rely on services like Tor, rely on protocols like I2P, for instance, which is the decentralized invisible internet. Downloading it is incredibly easy. Running it on various systems, even down to your phone, even down to a Docker container or something, you can do it. And I'll probably make a video on this specifically because it's a very interesting topic. It's actually the dark web, but kind of better. And, going down this rabbit hole might be the only saving grace, right? And it might sound extreme, but guys, we live in an extreme world. It's time to fight back. It's time to fucking go to these goddamn governments and politicians and stop getting fucked in the ass. They might take away your privacy. They might take away your freedoms. But there's always ways to fight back, especially in the digital age, ladies and gentlemen. Let Uncle Muda walk you through the sea to true internet sovereignty. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and I am out.